What's going on, guys? Good Mike Ward Commentaries back at you as WrestleMania month continues to roll on here on the YouTube channel. Today, we have got a big one. I'm really excited to review this pay-per-view on its 30th anniversary. That's right, WrestleMania 10 went down 30 years ago today. This is a pay-per-view that's very near and dear to my heart due to the fact that I'm a massive Bret Hart fangirl. All of you know that. And this is kind of a guilty pleasure of mine. WrestleMania 10 isn't really high on everyone's list in terms of the greatest WrestleManias of all time, but it definitely ranks on my personal list of favorite WrestleManias of all time, specifically because of two, maybe even three matches that took place on this card. So since we are having a big WrestleMania month on the channel commemorating this year's 40th WrestleMania, I thought that we needed to do, for the first time ever on this channel, a full review, standalone review of WrestleMania 10. Now, we have touched on WrestleMania 10 countless times in the past. We've talked about Bret and Owen. We've talked about Razor and Shawn's ladder match, Bret winning the title in the main event, and a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff that was going on around this time in WWE as well. We've touched on it throughout the years here on the channel several times, but I don't think we've ever done a standalone review on WrestleMania 10. So what better day to do this review than on the 30th anniversary of this show? That's right, WrestleMania 10 went down 30 years ago today on March 20th, 1994. Your boy was a junior in high school. I was still figuring it out. I had just entered the workforce. I had only had my driver's license for a few months. I mean, I was young, but I was a massive Bret Hart fan, and I remember being at work at my dishwashing job that weekend, getting ready for Sunday, WrestleMania, and being very, very nervous and scared for what I might see on that show. And little did I know, the next day when I'd be at home watching that show on pay-per-view, I'd be a very, very happy guy. So welcome to your WrestleMania 10 review. I want to thank everybody for all of your great feedback on the WrestleMania videos we've done so far in terms of our collabs and our special episodes and other random little small videos I might have hit you with on the channel this month. I appreciate all of the good feedback on that. It's been really, really fun, and I'm really looking forward to WrestleMania 40 coming up in just a couple of weeks. It's going to be a massive weekend of festivities here on the channel, so make sure you subscribe and hit that like button below, because this coming WrestleMania is going to be fun. We're going to be here for the Hall of Fame and SmackDown. We're going to be here for Night 1 and Night 2, watch-alongs, reviews, recaps, discussions, everything, including the Monday Raw after Mania. So it's going to be a long, long WrestleMania 40 weekend. I hope you guys can join me for all of it. But today, like I said, we're going to talk about a WrestleMania that was 30 WrestleManias ago, WrestleMania 10, that went down on March 20th, 1994 from Madison Square Garden in New York City. The attendance for this show is listed at 18,065, and the show did about 420,000 pay-per-view buys. Now, in terms of what was going on behind the scenes during this time, this would have been 1994, early 1994, and Vince McMahon and the WWE were right in the middle of the steroid scandal and the steroid trial. So Vince was still fighting this hard, probably very distracted, probably pretty stressed out, and still having to book a milestone WrestleMania back in your own living room at Madison Square Garden, where the very first one took place, and the biggest star that your company has known up until that point, he's absent from this. That's right, Hulk Hogan, not at WrestleMania 10. And looking back as a fan, was pretty mind-blowing that you had the first 9 WrestleManias all headlined, more or less, by Hulk Hogan. And now you get to the 10th one in Madison Square Garden, the same building that WrestleMania 1 took place in, and the same building that Hulk Hogan won the WWE title from the Iron Sheik in about 10 years prior to this. He's not there. And I remember as a fan being really confused by that, but there was more going on behind the scenes. Like I said, Vince McMahon was already dealing with the steroid trial and the steroid scandal. He was still fighting for his life there. WWE had already made a conscious decision to kind of downsize, go smaller, move away from, the big muscular superhero type guys and move to a younger, more athletic form of wrestling, which is why guys like Bret and Shawn and others were able to excel around this time. But also, it was reported prior to WrestleMania, or the rumors were, I think in the Observer, around February of 1994, that Hulk Hogan could possibly go to WCW. Now, it wasn't really a done deal yet, but there were rumblings of that because he was filming the Thunder in Paradise show, and I think WCW stars were involved in that. There might have been some bitter feelings or whatever, and of course, that is where Eric Bischoff approached Hulk Hogan and convinced him to join WCW, but he wasn't quite there yet. So coming in here and making an appearance at WrestleMania 10 certainly would have been appropriate, but maybe due to what was going on behind the scenes, it just wasn't possible. Now, I do believe that Bruce Pritchard has talked about this with Conrad before. I think Hulk Hogan and Vince McMahon did not have much of a relationship in 1994, and that's a bummer because I think it would have been really cool to see Hulk Hogan there, maybe put somebody over, or maybe be one of these special guest referees that we would see in both championship matches, but it was not to be. And I think looking back, from a fan's perspective, that is the weirdest thing about this show, is that you had the first 9 WrestleManias all about Hulk, and then 10 had nothing to do with him. And then it would happen again. 10 years later, he was involved at WrestleMania 18, big match with The Rock. WrestleMania 19, big match with Vince. Then they're back in Madison Square Garden for WrestleMania 20. No Hogan. But there was Hogan at WrestleMania 21. So I don't know what it is about Hulk Hogan missing these milestone shows. He finally did turn up for WrestleMania 30 in the Silver Dome in New Orleans and did the thing with Hogan and The Rock. But it is kind of bizarre how the two WrestleManias besides WrestleMania 1 that were in Madison Square Garden, Hogan was nowhere to be found. And that's crazy. But 1994 was a weird time, not the best year in WWE, although I think WrestleMania 10 and SummerSlam this year were pretty good shows, where 1995, I think arguably the business might have been better, but the pay-per-views were garbage. Royal Rumble, WrestleMania, King of the Ring, SummerSlam, they all sucked until you got to Survivor Series in 1995, which was a pretty good show. Here in 1994, I think the Rumble was still decent with the casket match stuff. The Brett Luger tie was stupid, but it wasn't a bad show. WrestleMania 10, not a bad show, but not a great one either. And then SummerSlam was pretty solid. I think they were a little bit stronger on pay-per-view in 94 than they were in 95, even though the business, I believe, was kind of down in 1994. And like I said, Vince is awfully distracted with the steroid stuff going on. The company is, probably facing some uncertain times, and you are still trying to focus and build and book your show and continue your company moving in the right direction. So as a fan, to me, I was a little bit aware of what was going on in terms of the steroid stuff, but I wasn't that dialed into it. So I was looking at the show primarily from the perspective of a fucking mark, because that's what I was. A big, huge Bret Hart fan, the biggest one there was. Fangirl to the umpteenth degree is what this guy was for Bret Hart. So I was very nervous going into the show because of the background and everything that took place leading up to this event. Now, we remember the background of the show. The background was the Royal Rumble 1994 coming down to Bret Hart and Lex Luger. Props to both of these guys for being able to topple over that top rope and literally land on the outside of the ring at the same time, to where they didn't have to tongue-in-cheek anything or whatever. It actually looked legit. And that would take us into WrestleMania 10, to where now both guys were going to kind of get a title shot. Now, I've always hated the tie finish because I just feel like that's silly in the Royal Rumble, why you would even have a tie when you can just put the two guys back in the ring and say, fight it out, sudden death type of thing, especially when Jack Tunney was present for that. And then they just decided to do the tie. But really, I think what this was is just Vince being Vince. Back in the day, he tried to not defeat or beat or he tried to keep strong as many of his baby faces as he could. And when it came to his top baby faces, he didn't really like to beat them at all. That's why we saw nothing in Shawn and Brett at WrestleMania 12 in that Iron Man match. And with Lex, we all heard the story about Lex Luger being the plan since SummerSlam to win the title at WrestleMania 10. But between SummerSlam and WrestleMania 10, the fans and, maybe WWE just weren't feeling it with Lex for whatever reason, and WWE started changing their mind and thinking they were going to go to Brett. So maybe doing the tie finish was a way of Vince McMahon just seeing it through. Maybe the promise he made to Lex that this is the direction I'm going to go in, but now we're also going to keep Brett around in case we have to go with him Or maybe they did it so they could continue to decide who they wanted to go with between WrestleMania at the Royal Rumble. But to me as a fan, it seemed very clear that even though I was still worried, it seemed clear that Brett was probably going to be the guy because of the plan from SummerSlam. Since SummerSlam was to go with Lex, then why didn't they go with Lex? The fact that they made Brett a tie winner with him made me think that Brett legitimately has a chance. Although at the same time, I was still very nervous. I was just happy Brett was getting an opportunity, but he also had a lot to deal with his brother Owen, and it really felt like the company was pushing Lex hard, and I was not a big Lex Luger fan. So I think at the time I might have had trouble kind of reading between the lines. Looking back now, it was plainly obvious, even at the Royal Rumble, that Brett was going to be the guy. After the Rumble match ended and they declared it a tie, both Brett and Luger went to the ropes to salute the crowd, and the crowd booed Luger and cheered pretty heavily for Brett. Now, they even did a spot on TV where Lex Luger stole the title away from Yokozuna or Mr. Fuji or whatever, and then Vince is like, would you guys like to see Luger come out with the belt? And Luger came out with the winged eagle, and Vince McMahon announced him as the new WWF champion. I think Meltzer might have reported this as, oh, WWE's filmed this so they can use it for after WrestleMania, when really it might have just been a test to see how the fans would react, or maybe a visual test to see how Luger would look with the belt. But either way, he didn't come out to some big, humongous ovation. So I don't know where the exact moment was that Vince McMahon changed his mind, but to me, it felt pretty obvious around the time of WrestleMania. So the way they would set this up after the Royal Rumble tie is they would do a coin toss on Monday Night Raw with Bret Hart and Lex Luger. And they had it set up to where there would be two scenarios regardless of who won. So if Lex Luger won the coin toss, that means he would face Yokozuna first, and Bret Hart would face the winner of that match. But since Bret's going to be facing the winner, he also needs to have a match under his belt to keep it even. So he is going to be booked in a match against his brother. So the Bret and Owen WrestleMania match really at the end of the day came down to a coin toss. It wasn't because Owen challenged him and Bret accepted. It was a coin toss that did this. Now, if Bret were to win the coin toss, then he would face Yokozuna first, and Lex would face the winner of that, and Lex would have to face Crush in the earlier match. So I remember watching the coin toss on Raw, and again, me just not seeing the writing on the wall quite yet, watching the coin toss, seeing Bret Hart lose the coin toss, and being bummed out about it. Where I should have immediately realized losing the coin toss is good. Losing the coin toss guarantees that Bret Hart's going to be in the main event. But I remember myself being disappointed. Like Bret should get the shot first. But as a fan, why would I want that? You know, would Bret win the title in the mid card and then successfully defend it against Luger? Is that what they would do? Maybe, but I doubt it. It's not Vince's style. So it makes a lot of sense why the coin toss went the way it did. But at the time, I kind of had a hard time understanding that. So with Lex Luger winning the toss, he now faces Yokozuna first, and Bret Hart has to face Owen Hart going into WrestleMania 10 in Madison Square Garden. And I got to tell you guys, visually, this is one of my favorite WrestleManias. I know it's a small building, it's not a stadium show, but there's something about WrestleMania in Madison Square Garden that just feels special. I like the way this one looked even better than WrestleMania 20. And I thought WrestleMania 20 had a great setup, but WrestleMania 10 still had the old school entrance that was really short to the ring, where at WrestleMania 20, they went with the more traditional ramp and everything over on, the left-hand side of the arena, where at WrestleMania 10, they're still doing that old school straight in front of the ring entrance that we would see at SummerSlam Highway to Hell and Royal Rumble 08 and and Survivor Series 2002, a lot of other pay-per-views and shows in Madison Square Garden. You have that entrance there with the big Roman numeral X there in the middle. It looked great. The wide shot of the garden with the fireworks coming in to open up the show looked so awesome. I just thought that for 1994, it was great to see a packed, crazy sellout house. And this was one of the first WrestleManias that was sold solely on the WrestleMania name. This was one of the first pay-per-views or WrestleManias, I think, to sell out in just a matter of minutes before any matches were announced. So that kind of began the trend of WrestleMania not being a destination for one specific match or star, but kind of being the ice-capades. It's the spectacle of the whole thing that you're attending, not there to see one specific match. So they, even in 1994, did a really good number for this, good buy rate, and pretty good on the attendance there with a very, very rapid sellout in the Garden. Now, one of my favorite renditions ever at WrestleMania of America the Beautiful was here at WrestleMania 10 with Little Richard. I really, really like this one. This one, obviously, Aretha Franklin at WrestleMania 3. I loved Ray Charles at WrestleMania 2. And there's been some other ones that have been good, very good even, but something about this Little Richard one I really liked. And Vince was in there to give him the big welcome. There was a lot of celebrities at this WrestleMania, a lot of celebrities. So even though WWE wasn't in the greatest of financial times, they ponied up for a lot of celebs for this show, and that was kind of the norm for WrestleMania. Although I don't recall, did we have celebs the previous year in Vegas? I don't think we did, but we had a bunch for WrestleMania 8, so the celebs were out in mass for this one, as they would be for WrestleMania 11, and then finally, WWE would cool it on the celebs around WrestleMania 12 for a little bit. But here at WrestleMania 10, lots of celebrities, and Little Richard was one of my favorites. And it was funny how Vince McMahon introduced him as the wild man of rock and roll, because just a couple of years later, at WrestleMania, his doppelganger, Mark Marrow, the Wild Man, would make his appearance and debut in WWE. And I'm wondering if that's where Vince gave him his name. You know, was because of Little Richard. We know his Johnny B. Bad gimmick was a knockoff of that. So I thought that was funny. Vince gives him a hero's welcome, huge introduction like only Vince McMahon can do. And Little Richard proceeds to have a great rendition of America the Beautiful with the choir singers around there at ringside. It was just a great visual looking presentation, and I really liked it. I'm not a big fan of the national anthem, but I do like America the Beautiful. I like that song better. I like that it's kind of a tradition at WrestleMania to do that, and this was one of the best from Little Richard here. We also had on commentary the return of Jerry the King Lawler. Right after Little Richard finishes America the Beautiful, Vince McMahon then welcomes back Jerry Lawler. Now, Jerry Lawler had been off WWE TV for several months dealing with some rape and sodomy allegations from an underage girl that eventually was, I think, settled out of court. I think there was a settlement made, or she recanted her story. Whatever it was ugly. It's one of many really kind of gross accusations and stories about Jerry Lawler that we've kind of all heard about over the years. And this one was one of the worst. And because of the steroid trial and everything else going on behind the scenes in WWE, this did go largely unnoticed. I mean, Lawler did have to bow out of a Survivor Series 1993 match, and that's where they brought the returning Shawn Michaels, who was also serving a suspension, back in his replacement to replace him, and team up with those Knights to face Bret Hart. So that thing completely basically ended the Bret Hart and Jerry Lawler feud in 1993. So Lawler had to take a few months off to deal with this. Once it was blown over and it all was settled, Lawler was brought back, and here at WrestleMania 10 was the night that he made his return to commentary to join Vince McMahon. Now, we did have one dark match on this show. It was the Heavenly Bodies defeating the Bushwhackers. So the Bushwhackers took an L here in the dark match against the Heavenly Bodies before the main card began. In terms of the main card, it opened up with one of my favorite WrestleMania matches of all time, and I think my second favorite Bret Hart WrestleMania match of all time. Bret Hart, Owen Hart, opening match, WrestleMania 10, brother versus brother, everything that had happened between these guys that began at the Survivor Series in that match against Shawn Michaels and his Knights. That would have been Jerry Lawler. Everything probably would have played out the exact same way had Lawler been there. This was where they were going to move Owen into a heel run and a singles push and pit him against Bret Hart. And in that Survivor Series match, Owen was the only Hart brother eliminated as he teamed up with Bret and Bruce and Keith, I believe. He was the only Hart brother eliminated, and the Harts ran the table on Shawn and the Knights. And then after the match, when all of the Harts were celebrating, Owen came back pissed off and got in Bret Hart's face. Everybody tried to calm him down. He was too mad. He wanted nothing to do with it. And then the next week on TV, wound up challenging Bret Hart to a match one-on-one. Bret Hart the following week said no, under no circumstances will he fight his brother. He will just not do it. And then we came into Christmas time. and the holidays. And somehow, some way, over the holidays, Christmas dinner or whatever, Owen Hart and Brett patched things up, and they agreed to not only bury the hatchet, but team up to face current tag team champions, the Quebecers, at the Royal Rumble. And of course, we all know how this went. Bret Hart and Owen Hart fell short of winning the tag team titles because Bret injured his leg. He wouldn't tag Owen. Referee stopped the match, awarded the Quebecers the victory and the titles. Owen was pissed. He thought Bret was being selfish, and then he kicked Bret's leg out of his leg at the Royal Rumble, like we all remember. And that still wasn't really enough to convince Bret Hart to face his brother, but the coin toss kind of forced Bret Hart's hand, and now he has to face Owen in the opening match of WrestleMania 10. They kind of tried to trick you here for a minute with the ring announcer as he announced the first person to come down to the aisle as being from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And then the crowd started cheering, and then Owen's music started playing. And then Vince was like, oh, I thought it was going to be the Hitman. It didn't really fool me. They started playing Owen's music. So once Owen's music started playing, you should have known it wasn't going to be Bret Hart. But when Owen came through the entrance, that was when Vince acted all surprised. It was kind of stupid, but I get what they were trying to do there. Owen comes out, of course. He's got the Bret Hart glasses, and he tears them up, and then it's time for Bret's entrance. And I think overall, when I think of a Bret Hart entrance anywhere, this is the one I think about. This is the one I think of. Bret Hart, WrestleMania 10, the music, the lights coming through that WrestleMania entrance with the X door and the WrestleMania banner over his head and the sunglasses. And for the first time, he was wearing like that longer version of his leather jacket, like kind of like a trench coat version, or a little tighter and longer. He only wore that a couple of times. I actually liked it. I was hoping he would keep it, and I thought it was a nice new look for him, but he only wore it, I think, at WrestleMania 10, and then the night after on Raw when he did the promo as new WWE champion, and I don't recall seeing that jacket again after this. But Bret coming out with that WrestleMania 10 entrance in Madison Square Garden is just peak visual Bret to me. When I think of Bret Hart, I think of him making his entrance at WrestleMania 10. It's just a perfect visual if you're a Bret Hart fan like myself and so many of you are. Now, Bret and Owen then proceed to have one of the best matches I've ever seen. It was just so nice and clean and smooth. It was Savage Steamboat level in terms of, you know, just the excitement and the coolness of it. As a kid, I could not wait to see Savage and Steamboat face each other based on what Savage did to him with that ring bell and all of the gnarly shit leading up to that match between the two. This was kind of the same thing, because even though it wasn't as brutal as what Savage did to Steamboat, Bret and Owen, brothers, and knowing that Bret Hart is reluctantly going into this match was intriguing to me, and I was curious how it was going to go. Now, as a fan, I was still looking at Owen Hart as a mid-card wrestler and Bret Hart a main event wrestler. So in my mind, there was no way Owen was going to beat Bret Hart. But as the match progressed, you could see how used to each other they were, and it was great. And their styles are a little bit different. Owen, a lot of fans think Owen is a better wrestler than Bret. He's a little flashier, got a little more pizzazz, a little more shine. He's a little more athletic, agile, more of a high flyer, more of an exciting style, where Bret Hart is very smooth and a very, very smooth worker, but he's a little bit more deliberate, ground and pound type of thing, working on the mat. So Owen is a little bit of both, because Owen also has that technical wrestling ability, but he can fly too. So they make for really, really great opponents, and they had excellent chemistry, and their match was just so much fun. And of course, we know how the finish went. One of my favorite finishes to a WWE match ever, because as a fan, I was truly shocked. Of course, in hindsight, it makes a lot of sense, and I want to tell my younger self, what are you, a fucking idiot, Greg? It made perfect sense that Bret was going to lose. But when he did, it scared me shitless. And of course, Owen Hart whips Bret Hart into the buckle. He charges in. Bret gets his feet up, catches Owen right in the face. Bret climbs on Owen's shoulders for a victory roll. He goes to execute it. Owen steps into it, crunches down on Bret Hart, trapping him. 1, 2, as Bret's kicking. 3, and he kicks out after the 3 count. Owen is shocked. Big, gigantic white loogie stuck to the side of his face. Lawler is going nuts. Vince can't believe it. The crowd can't believe it. I can't believe it. Owen Hart beat his brother, Bret the Hitman Hart, completely clean right there in the ring in Madison Square Garden at WrestleMania. I was shocked and freaked out. Again, not being able to see the writing on the wall, not realizing, don't panic, Greg. They're not going to beat Bret in the opening match and then beat him in the main event. But that's what I thought they were going to do. I really did. I'm like, fuck, they're screwing over Bret. I couldn't put it all together yet. It didn't really dawn on me. If this was any other wrestler, I could have sniffed this out. But I was blinded by my Bret Hart loyalty. I was not thinking clearly, and I think that any other fan that might not have cared as much as me might have easily been able to decipher that losing to Owen Hart is actually a good sign for him later on, because otherwise, why would Vince do that to Bret? Beat him and then beat him again? Is he going to WCW? What other justification would there be for that? But at the time, I couldn't see that. So I saw Bret Hart losing to Owen as a big problem for later. And not only that, the entire match, as good as it was, Owen was working on Bret Hart's leg. So now he's injured on top of that. So Bret Hart not only loses, but hobbles out of the ring on a limp. And now he's going to be facing the winner of Lex and Yokozuna in the main event. So at least this was the opener, and Bret had all night to kind of recover or to rest. But still, as a Bret Hart fan, Greg was worried. Throughout the show, they would take you back to WrestleMania moments. Every single WrestleMania, they would, chronicle a big match or a big moment, and they would take you through all the WrestleManias with the WrestleMania 1 tag team match. And then here, their next WrestleMania moment was the WrestleMania 2 Battle Royal that had all of the NFL players in it that Andre the Giant wound up winning. And of course, Bret Hart was the runner-up in that match. The next matchup is one that epitomizes the WWE product in 1994. Bam Bam Bigelow and his main squeeze, Luna Vachon, taking on Doink and Dink the Clowns. This Doink and Dink shit was getting ridiculous. I loved Doink the Clown as a heel clown when he came in 1993 or late 92 and spent most of 1993 as a heel. And then they turned him babyface. They changed his music. He's no longer an evil clown. He's a fun-loving clown. And now he's got a little clown, Dink, with him as well. And now they're going to be in a mixed tag match against Bam Bam and Luna Vachon. So before the match gets going, WWE has yet another celebrity on hand for this, or kind of a celebrity. Cy Sperling, who was the owner of Hair Club for Men. They used to have those commercials all the time in the 90s. I'm not only the Hair Club president, but I'm also a client. And so he was, I guess, the president, maybe not the owner, the president of Hair Club for Men. And those commercials were pretty famous back in the 90s. So they brought him in just for that, and they stuck a rug on the Fink. So Howard Finkel is introduced with some of Cy Sperling's work there on his head. It didn't look bad. It was clearly a rug, but it definitely didn't look bad. Not bad enough for Elaine to grab it and throw it out of a four-story apartment window in New York City. That's for sure. But Fink looked pretty good with some hair on his head. That was funny. And now it was time for the match. So Bam Bam Bigelow and Luna Vachon come out first, followed by Doink and Dink. And Bam Bam attacks Doink before the bell even rings, so Doink doesn't even have his gear off yet. He did take the time to go around the ring and spray Cy Sperling in the face with some of the water from his little flower on his gear there. But once he got in the ring, Bam Bam attacked and took advantage pretty early here. Dink was tagged in a couple of times to face off with Luna Vachon. Vince McMahon even made reference to the fact that Dink is a wrestler and knows what he's doing, but he's still kind of overmatched by Luna and Bam Bam. This match is all kinds of stupid. I can't believe they had this match on WrestleMania 10 when you had a lot of other talent on the roster that actually didn't make the show, including that 10-man tag that would get bumped later. This match was just not enjoyable to me. I really loved Bam Bam Bigelow, but thought it was ridiculous that he was involved in a match like this. And he was too big of a star to be messing around in this type of thing to me. That's the way I felt about Bam Bam. And he would main event the following year's WrestleMania, of course, as we know, against Lawrence Taylor. So in the end, Dink is up there dinking around on the ring apron. He gets knocked off the apron by Bam Bam, takes a spill. Bam Bam puts down Doink, goes to the top rope and hits his Bam Bam Bigelow headbutt on Doink for the pin. And Bam Bam and Luna do get the victory. Now, Dink tries to attack after the match, but then he gets beat down by Luna. And Luna Vachon and Bam Bam go for like this double splash on Dink to like kill Dink. Dink rolls out of the way and is able to avoid Bam Bam, but Luna lands on him. And then the referees finally get Luna and Bam Bam out of there, and Dink and Doink console each other after the loss. Really, really stupid fucking match. After that, we start hearing Hail to the Chief play, and we cut to the crowd where the Bill Clinton lookalike that was all over TV back in the 90s is here. He would also be present for the Survivor Series in 1995 in Washington, D.C. So the Clinton lookalike is here, and he just kind of gives everybody a wave, and he would be interviewed later on in the show. It's time for our next WrestleMania moment. This one was taking a look back at, of course, WrestleMania 3 and the record-setting crowd that they had there that night of 93,000, and the big Hogan and Andre match. We've talked about that many times throughout the years. Next match is Randy Savage versus Crush. This is kind of a sad one for me, one of Savage's last WWE televised matches. I think he wrestled in 94 after this, but I'm not sure how many more on-TV matches Randy Savage had in WWE before he left a few months later. But it was good to see him having a match at WrestleMania, in such an important WrestleMania, and WrestleMania 10. If you weren't going to have Hogan on the show, at least have Savage. And he was going to be taking on the recently turned heel Crush. Now, these two were billed as friends, as best friends, when Crush was a babyface in WWE, and then he wound up having a match with Yokozuna on Raw, where Yoko bonsai dropped him several times. Savage was on commentary for this and did not help Crush, and so Crush was very upset about this, hung up the phone on Savage when they tried to call him one night on Raw, and so they set up a Savage Crush summit on Raw leading up to WrestleMania, where they would put their differences aside, and they did. I believe they shake hands, and that's when Crush attacks Savage and then lifts him up and drops him throat first or face first on the guardrail, and they claim that Savage like bit his tongue and had a very, very severe injury from that, and he was going to be out of action for a while. So that set up this match here at WrestleMania between Savage and Crush. I think Savage comes out first. He makes his big entrance, which was just so great to see. He's wearing like a checkered white and black type of gear. And again, much like the Bret entrance, just with the lighting treatment and his music, you know, Bret Hart was my first favorite. Randy Savage was number 2. So to see Randy Savage, even though the match we're about to talk about here fucking sucks, it was great to see him come out at WrestleMania and have that WrestleMania entrance. He even does the big handshake with Vince on the outside, which, you know, again, makes me even sadder knowing that he would wind up leaving. It always felt like him and Vince had a pretty good relationship, but as the story goes, Vince McMahon did not want him in the ring. He wanted him on commentary, which is just mind-blowing to me considering how weak your roster was in 1994. You could really use someone like Savage, but for whatever reason, Vince wanted him to be primarily used as a commentator and to maybe be kind of an ambassador or face of the WWE type of thing, but Savage had other ideas, and as we would see just a few months later, he would be debuting in WCW, but he was still here in WWE around this time, WrestleMania 10. He's ready to rock against Crush. Crush comes out next, and he's got Mr. Fuji with him, and Savage would attack him in the aisleway. Now, one very important thing I forgot to mention, and I almost left out here, is that this match is a Falls Count Anywhere match, but it's not the type of Falls Count Anywhere match you're expecting. I don't think we had seen many of these. I'm not sure if ECW or WCW had even done one by this point, a Falls Count Anywhere match, but basically the rules to this are different than other ones, where it's not just a match where the fall can count anywhere, it's falls count anywhere. So if you get pinned outside of the ring, the rule in this match is that you have 60 seconds to make it back to the ring, which is stupid because this would cause them a problem later on in the match. So they are basically forcing the wrestlers to have the finish happen outside of the ring. You see what I mean? Like if you have 60 seconds, if the rule is you have 60 seconds to get back in the ring, what happens if you're pinned in the ring? You're already in the ring. So it's pointless to pin you in the ring. They're basically making a match to where they should have named it something different, where they should have called it falls can't take place in the ring. Falls have to take place somewhere else in the arena, because falls count anywhere. That has a different meaning now in modern times. This 60-second shit was really stupid. So Savage charges Crush in the entrance way while he's making his way to the ring. Crush then takes control, turns the tables, and drops Savage on the guardrail again the same way he did in that Savage and Crush Summit on Raw. And after he does that, he pins Savage 1, 2, 3 right there in the aisleway. So now Savage has 60 seconds to make it the 15 feet from the aisleway to the ring, and he takes every single second of that minute to get back. He just crawls so slowly back in the ring and gets in there. They continue to have their match. In the ring, Savage takes control of Crush. He's able to put him down and hit his patented Savage top rope elbow onto Crush in the ring, but then he goes to pin him, and he can't pin him. And it's like they're all kind of looking at each other like, what do we do? And then Savage is like, okay. And in a little bit of confusion, Savage just grabs Crush and drags him and pushes him underneath the bottom rope to the floor and then pins him out there. And then Vince is like, oh, whoa, that makes sense. So I don't think they thought this all the way through. So referee counts 1, 2, 3 on the floor, and now Crush has 60 seconds just to make it back from the floor into the ring. And of course he does. Brawl continues. And this is where they brawl to the back. So this little stipulation of having 60 seconds to get back to the ring, that was all done to set up a spot that didn't even work out. Savage and Crush brawl through the arena. Savage takes Crush and throws him through these double doors. He busts through the double doors, lands on the floor. They're now in the backstage area, and Savage gets down on top of Crush to pin him. 1, 2, 3, pins him in the backstage area, starts walking back to the ring, but then he turns around to come back, and he grabs, there's like a little pulley system or something there, like some ropes or some sort of cables that he pulls down. He ties it, or attempts to tie it, around the legs of Crush, tries to tie it in a knot. He doesn't do a very good job. And then he's pulling this pulley thing up, and the idea is to lift Crush up by his feet and hang him upside down. But as soon as Savage has Crush all the way hung upside down, he kind of lets go of the cable, and Crush just slumps back down. So he's still got the shit tied around his feet, but he's not hanging up upside down like I think they might have intended. So this whole thing did not work. It looked terrible. It was still enough for Crush not to recover from. He was not able to untangle himself and make it back to the ring. And Savage did get the win here once the 60-second clock wound down, and he won, and he celebrated, and he would continue to celebrate next door at the Paramount, where they think they stuck another 5,000 fans. And he went over there and had a great time, and it was a big, awesome victory for Savage. But man, the rule of that fall and the Falls Count Anywhere match with that 60 seconds to get back to the ring shit was stupid, and the whole botch trying to hang Crush upside down, not executed well at all. I really would like to have a do-over on this one. I wish these two, I wish WWE could go back in time and rebook this a little bit smarter, get rid of that 60-second rule, get rid of hanging Crush upside down, and just have Savage get his revenge, you know, because Savage is capable of that. He should have just gone out there and fucking murdered Crush the same way he did to Jake Roberts or anybody else that did him wrong in the past. That's the way I would have booked that one. So kind of a letdown finish and execution of the match, but Savage appearing and winning at WrestleMania is never something I'm going to complain about. Then we go back up to the presidential box where the Toddster is interviewing Mr. President. He has Erwin R. Shyster in the booth with him as well, and IRS congratulates Mr. President on raising taxes. I thought that was pretty funny. And then after that, we had a recap of what I believe was the first ever like fan fest in WWE. The first time they attached one of these things to WrestleMania. They made it a big deal. You know, very, very primitive early days of a fan fest where you can meet some wrestlers, take some pictures. I think they had a funeral parlor set there, and you could call a classic WWE match with a headset. You could sumo wrestle, things like that you could do. And I think this one here in 1994 was the first one that began the trend of pretty big WrestleMania fan fest access, and now they're doing the world thing. And it all kind of started 30 years ago here in 1994. Here's an interesting match next. My God, WWE Women's Champion Alundra Blaze defending her championship against Leilani Kai. Leilani Kai, who had been absent from WWE for about 10 years, randomly turns back up, and they book her to face Alundra Blaze here at WrestleMania 10 for the title. Leilani Kai actually challenged and lost to Wendy Richter at WrestleMania 1, so I think it was just a little throwback to bring Leilani Kai back. And this was kind of an interesting match, but also a pointless one, because Alundra Blaze back in the day was the women's champion and the only woman under contract. They either brought her friends in from Japan to work with her, or they just brought in randos to work against her. And they thought it would be neat to get Leilani Kai in for WrestleMania 10, but I think it would have been cooler to get Wendy Richter, although she left the company on very bad terms and probably had not patched things up with them quite yet by this point. So Leilani Kai it was. Not a terrible match, however, short, stupidly short. 3 minutes, 3 quick minutes. German suplex from Alundra to Leilani Kai for the win. After she won and was celebrating with her title, they cut to the crowd where you see Classy Freddie Blassie, you see Captain Lou Albano, Nikolai Volkov, the Fabulous Moolah, and Mae Young. But Mae Young was not being referenced yet by WWE. They never mentioned her. She was sitting right there. Vince went through all those names, Blassie, Albano, Moolah, everybody. Never mentioned Mae Young. She didn't really come into the fold until around the Attitude Era, but you could still see, even back in those days, Mae Young and Moolah joined at the Broken Hip. Here's an interesting stat about Alundra Blaze and Leilani Kai. These two actually had a rematch 5 years later on Nitro in 1999. It was Medusa versus Patty Stone Grinder, who was also known as Leilani Kai. You can find that match on, I don't have the date on it, but it does exist on Nitro in 1999. So these two did meet again years later in WCW. After that, we went to our next Mania moment. This was a recap of WrestleMania 5 and the return of Rowdy Roddy Piper. Now, of course, we just here on the channel about a week ago watched WrestleMania 5 in our watch-along, and I hated that segment with Morton Downey Jr. and Brother Love. I thought it was so bad and a terrible way to reintroduce Piper into the WWE. I was not a fan. After that, the Tag Team Championships were on the line. Men on a Mission challenging the Quebecers. Now, prior to this match happening, we cut backstage real quick. Todd Pettengill is back there with Rhonda Shear, who used to host USA's Up All Night. I remember her. And Shawn Michaels butts in to get next to Rhonda, calls him an item. And that's when Burt Reynolds comes in, pushes the photographer out of the way, boots Shawn's ass out of there, and puts his arm around Rhonda and makes like they are now a thing. So Burt came in and stole HBK's woman. I thought that was pretty funny. And now it was time for the Tag Team Championship match. Now, I was not a huge fan of Men on a Mission, but at the same time, WWE did not have a lot of great tag teams at this time. The tag team division in WWE was garbage, and Men on a Mission was relatively over. They had Oscar, wave your hands in the air and wave them in the atmosphere. They had all that going on. The fans were chanting, whoop, there it is. They were doing the thing, but I was just not a Men on a Mission fan. But even though I wasn't a Men on a Mission fan, I felt like they should win the belts here. I really did. I thought they were going to win the belts here. And again, kind of another one of these lame finishes that we got. Not a fun match at all. Typical stuff from these teams. It goes about 7 minutes. We did see the Quebecers do one of their typical moves where Jacques throws Pierre, PCO, somersaults him over the top rope. He did one of those. So it's good to see PCO out there taking his bumps and whatnot. But in the end, it ends in a countout. It ends in a countout when Men on a Mission, for whatever reason, decides to hit their finisher on Pierre on the outside of the ring. So I think he's the legal man. Jacques is tossed out. They then toss out Pierre to the outside of the ring, and their finisher is where like Mabel splashes you with Mo jumping on his back. So they execute that on Pierre on the floor, and then they both get back in the ring, and the referee just counts the Quebecers out. And Men on a Mission win by countout. They celebrate with the titles, but they didn't win the titles. And they would wind up winning the titles, I think, later on in the year. I don't know why they just didn't put the belts on them here. It's weird to me. I don't know, and I don't understand why. So it turned out to be a countout instead, and because of that, the Quebecers were able to keep the tag team championships, which I didn't love because I didn't like the Quebecers either, to be honest. I was not a fan of any of WWE's tag teams in 1994 at all. I thought they all sucked. Next up was our next WrestleMania moment. They took us back to WrestleMania 6 in the Sky Dome to watch the big confrontation between Hogan and Warrior. We all know how massive that match was. And now it was time for our first WWF Championship match of the night. Lex Luger challenging WWE Champion Yokozuna. So here we go. This one was wild. Now, of course, we have celebrities and a special guest referee involved in both of the championship matches. The celebrities for this match were Rhonda Shear, who was going to be the guest timekeeper, and Donnie Wahlberg, member of New Kids on the Block and brother of Mark Wahlberg. He's going to be the ring announcer. So they make their entrance to that music they were playing for the celebrities at the show. And then Donnie Wahlberg gets in the ring. He gets on the mic and he says, "Let me introduce to you the special guest referee, Mr. Perfect." And out comes Mr. Perfect. And that was a shocker to me because I had no idea who to expect. I thought about a lot of different names for the referees. I thought for sure one of them was going to be Hulk Hogan, and it was not here. It turned out to be Perfect instead. And I was talking about this match with Solomonster on the collab we did a couple of weeks ago, where we were talking about Luger in this match and how Perfect coming out should have been a clear indicator that they're going to do something fucked up here, but I didn't really see it that way at the time. Now, of course, it makes perfect sense, but at the time, I wasn't thinking that just because Perfect and Luger had an issue the previous year, that WWE was going to acknowledge it. Because we also had an issue the previous year between Bret Hart and Lex Luger as well that WWE wasn't mentioning at all. As a matter of fact, I think they were going to try to run an angle where it was Luger's fault that Bret Hart lost to Yokozuna, because Luger attacked Bret Hart at a WrestleMania brunch just hours before his match with Yoko at WrestleMania 9 and hit him with that forearm and knocked him out. And they didn't say shit about it on TV at all when Luger turned babyface. So now that Perfect is back, I'm not automatically thinking that he's going to screw Lex over because of their previous feud, because WWE already just ignores feuds and previous histories between guys sometimes already anyway. So I wasn't really thinking that that was a dead giveaway that Lex Luger wasn't going to win. I was a little bit terrified because Lex Luger came out to brand new music. And that frightened me because Luger getting brand new music treatment, you would think that would be something you would do for a guy who's about to win the championship. He's about to be your face of the company. He's kind of using some generic public domain music anyway already with that America shit that he was playing. So giving something a little bit more specific to him felt like a bad omen if I was a Bret Hart fan. So I think I was just, like I said, my judgment was clouded by Bret Hart loyalty. That was my problem in this. Now, Yokozuna, he was actually out first prior to Luger coming in there. And when Luger is making his entrance, Vince McMahon is practicing his blast off into the next decade line that he has or that he would use in the main event later on when Bret was celebrating. So Vince is kind of practicing that. He's ready to take WWE into the new generation and all of that. Vince is very on board with this idea. You can tell it just in his voice. And now we get the match between Lex and Yoko, and it was really, really nothing special at all. Mr. Perfect in there as a referee was very interesting. I had my eyes glued to him because even though I knew of the previous history between them, I wasn't sure if they were going to play into any of that or not. So The match continues on. Lex Luger starts to really gain control, and he goes up for that big body slam of his, and he's able to hit Yokozuna with it. And when he picks Yokozuna up in that body slam hip toss thing, Mr. Perfect sold it like $1 million. Luger was like, or Perfect was like, holy shit, when he was looking at Luger, like, I cannot believe he fucking did that. And then Luger starts making the motion for the forearm, which at this point, now that he's a babyface, they're not making him wear the protective padding for. So Yoko gets up from the body slam. Luger hits the ropes, launches himself, hits the forearm on Yokozuna, knocking him completely out. And that's when Jim Cornette jumps up on the apron, and Luger, like a fucking idiot, goes over and punches Jim Cornette and then brings him in the ring like slingshot style. So now Cornette is in the ring. On the other side of the ring, you got Fuji trying to come in. So Luger goes over there and punches Fuji. Yoko is unconscious in the middle of the ring, so you got Cornette down in the ring, Fuji down in the ring. Lex gets on Yoko to pin him, but Perfect won't count the pin because he has managers in the ring and he's trying to get him out of the ring. So he's trying to push Cornette out, trying to push Fuji out. Luger gets up, grabs a hold of Perfect, turns him around, kind of pushes him. Come on, what the fuck? Come count. He gets down on Yoko. Come on, count. 1, 2, 3. Perfect won't do it, goes over to the timekeeper, instructs her to ring the bell, and disqualifies Lex Luger for a couple of reasons, putting his hands on an official mostly, but also dragging managers in the ring. What I liked about this is even though it was Perfect getting some revenge and screwing over Luger, Luger had his own hand in this as well. Luger is not completely innocent of this. If he would have just left Jim Cornette alone and not brought him into the ring like an idiot when you've got the champion beat, we might not be having this conversation right now. So Perfect used that as his opportunity to DQ Luger. Luger is pissed. The fans are chanting bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. Todd Pettengill catches up with Mr. Perfect in the back where he explains his actions, and that's when the camera shows Luger showing or walking straight towards the back there to confront him. And he's able to barge in there right as Mr. Perfect is being interviewed by Todd, and Mr. Perfect explains why. He goes, give me one good reason, Perfect, why you did that. And Luger's like, I'll give you 3. You don't put your hands on official. You don't bring managers in the ring. You don't beat up people and all that shit. So he's trying to lay it all out to Luger. And then that's when Luger starts saying, if you had a problem with me, you take it up back here, not out there. So that's where they told you that Luger and Perfect still had unresolved issues from their previous feud the previous year, where they were in reversed roles. Luger was the heel, Perfect was the face. So I thought this was kind of an interesting program to move Luger into, since he wasn't going to be competing for the title. And I, for one, was thrilled. I was so happy that Luger lost, because now I was feeling it. Now I got it. Once Luger lost, then I was like, okay, Brett's going to win. I stopped being worried. The blinders were raised. I think I was so concerned with Luger taking Brett's spot or being a part of this, and I didn't want him to be. And now that he was kind of out of the way, he wasn't going to be winning the championship, and it even appears as if he has a new person to feud with. That's when I was like, oh, Brett is going to win. It took me all the way 2/3 through this show to finally kind of understand that, okay, this is going to be my night. So it took that long. The entire build to WrestleMania, weeks and weeks of build leading up to the show. Then even when the show starts, Brett's loss to Owen, everything is just crushing my confidence as a fan until Lex loses. Once Lex lost, I was sitting pretty. I'm like, this is going to be it. So I had about 20 minutes to get happy here, because we had a couple of matches to get out of the way first, like Adam Bomb and the returning Earthquake. So Earthquake is going to face Adam Bomb here. This is a complete squash. Prior to the match, Harvey Whippleman is in the ring, verbally assaulting Howard Finkel. These two have got a long, storied tuxedo match history that spans several years. These two have always hated each other. Harvey assaulting the Fink, tears his suit and rips like the pockets out, and then Fink pushes Harvey Whippleman down. That prompts Adam Bomb to come out and defend his manager and threaten the Fink. And then Earthquake comes in right behind him, attacks Adam Bomb, hits him with his power slam, and hits him with his Earthquake finisher, and beats him in 35 seconds. Complete squash here at WrestleMania. Earthquake debuts or I'm sorry, returning here, beating Adam Bomb. And when Earthquake is leaving the ring, Vince McMahon kind of lets it slip as there you see Yokozuna's potential opponent in the future. I think he kind of already knew that they were going to have Earthquake and Yoko work a program right after Mania, which they would. They would do that sumo wrestling thing on Raw where they would take the ropes away and whatnot. So Vince kind of let that out early that Yoko and Earthquake are going to be heading on a collision course now that Yoko won't be champion here in just a little bit. After that, we cut backstage to one of my favorite WrestleMania promos of all time from Jim Cornette. He's back there in the back with Todd, with Yoko, and a Mr. Fuji who kind of stumbles in late, where he lays out Lex Luger's match with Yoko and why he lost, and just does it in such a brilliant way before turning his attention to Bret Hart. Talks about the great poet and philosopher Ian Anderson and spits out some Bungle in the Jungle lyrics by Jethro Tull. Gotta love Jim Cornette back in these days. He reminds Lex Luger that the special guest referees were agreed upon by both parties, and then turns his attention to Bret Hart and says he knows about the knee, they've noticed the knee, and that the wrestling ring is going to be the ocean, and Bret's going to be the blood poured into the water that tips off the feeding frenzy of Yoko, and he's going to chew Bret up and spit him out, and Bret Hart is in trouble, and his career could be over at the biggest WrestleMania of all time. I can't wait to see it happen. I loved that promo by Jim Cornette. So fucking good. And then, next up, we have one of the best WrestleMania matches of all time, one of the best WrestleMania matches in history. Shawn Michaels versus Razor Ramon, Intercontinental title ladder match. And this one was so crazy, so good. I still, to this day, love this match 30 years later. Now, this was all set up the previous fall. Shawn Michaels got suspended for, I guess, failing a drug test of some kind, some sort of performance-enhancing substance that he got hit for. He always adamantly denied that he did anything. This was some sort of strange occurrence, or maybe he took something and didn't know it or whatever, but he was pretty salty about the suspension to the point where he wouldn't even send them back the Intercontinental Championship. So when they had to strip him of the title and crown a new champion, they had a new belt to give to Razor Ramon. So when Shawn Michaels came back from his suspension, he was wearing his Intercontinental Championship belt, and that took us through the Royal Rumble and some TVs where these guys had some confrontations and some attacks. Shawn Michaels would get involved in Razor's IC match at the Rumble against IRS. He would attack him in the aisleway a couple of times. So they had a lot of build between these two guys leading up to WrestleMania. And what they decided to do is just hang both championship belts from the ceiling and let them both compete for it here in a ladder match. And for 1994 standards, this match was pretty incredible. I love the entrances here. Shawn coming out with Diesel, Razor coming out and going underneath the ladder. All that was so much fun. And I had already seen a ladder match between Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart before, but in that match, they weren't using the ladder as much as a weapon. It was more just a tool to get to the belts and retrieve the belts. Plus, it was more of an exhibition, and they weren't really going all out with this thing, where Shawn and Razor were doing things that I wasn't expecting them to do. I don't think I was quite prepared for how they were going to use this ladder as a weapon. Using this ladder, ramming it into each other, smashing each other's faces with it, throwing it on each other's backs. The offense was so innovative. Shawn with the baseball slide with the ladder like into Razor's abdomen. That's when I was like, holy shit, that was an awesome move. And so the things they were doing with the ladder, I wasn't expecting it to be used as a weapon to the degree that it was. It even got all twisted and bent. There was that one spot where they're both up there and Razor just beels Shawn over off the ladder. Looked like he fell 15 fucking feet. It was so good. The aerial camera shots of these guys falling off the ladder, taking bumps, getting hit with it, seeing these guys sprawled out in the middle of the ring with the overhead camera looking down with the belts swinging back and forth. It was so good. I had not seen anything like this before up until now, and this was a really, really fun match, and one that just holds up and still produces a lot of those flashbulb memories. That classic one of Shawn doing the splash off the top of the ladder, landing on Razor Ramon. Even the finish I kind of liked. You had the finish With Shawn on the ladder, Razor hits the ropes and kind of shoulder tackles the ladder, which topples over, causing Shawn to crotch himself on the top rope. And then as he teeters over, his foot gets tied up in the ropes and he can't get out. That allows Razor to set the ladder up and start climbing up. And Shawn's trying to get his foot and his leg untangled. And as he does that, he flips over the rope to get his foot untangled, but then he ties his arm up. Now his arm is stuck and he can't get the arm out, and Razor climbs to the top and very, very aggressively pulls down those championships. Like, he didn't unsnap them. He just grabbed a hold of them and just used all of his weight to pull them and yank them and rip them off of the hook or the apparatus or whatever it's hanging from. And that could have gone a lot worse. I mean, if he would have pulled them down but left one up there, he would have had to reclimb up there, and the finish would have, had that little hiccup where he's lucky that they both came down with him and he landed on the mat hard with both titles. It worked out great, but could have been a disaster. He's really lucky those titles cooperated with him and he didn't slip, or his hand wasn't sweaty and he just slipped off and wasn't able to grab both of the belts, and then they had to kind of like redo the spot. So this worked out well. It was phenomenal, and Razor Ramon wins a classic match. And Shawn Michaels, Mr. WrestleMania, he is 6-11. He loses more than he wins, and that just goes to show you what a great competitor he is. Now, during this match, the story goes that Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon went over their allotted time. They went too long. So they had to cut a match. Apparently, Randy Savage was very mad about this. He cussed both of them out behind the scenes, and we were supposed to still get a 10-man tag between Jeff Jarrett, IRS, the Head Shrinkers, and Rick Martel taking on Sparkplug Holly, 1-2-3 Kid, Tatanka, and the Smoking Guns. But because the ladder match went over, they didn't have enough time to get this match done. So they shot a little quick angle backstage where the heel team can't decide who the captain is. They were just arguing about who the captain is, and then they cut back to the arena, and Vince is like, well, I guess we're not going to have the 10-man tag, just like that, because back in the day, they only had 2 hours and 45 minutes of pay-per-view time, and they weren't really able to bend on that. So their time was already allotted and spent, and when you go over, something's got to be cut. I feel bad for the 10-man tag. Might have been fun to see it at WrestleMania. They would give it to us on Monday Night Raw, but it's not the same as getting it at WrestleMania. And that only left enough time for the main event. We went into a nice Bret Hart and Yokozuna video package before we got here. It was just a highlight package of the two of them delivering offense to their opponents. That's all. No interviews or talking heads, nothing. Just music and action of them in the ring. And now it's time for the main event. Yokozuna defending his title against Bret Hart. Yokozuna now working double duty. He was just in the ring 2 matches ago, so he wasn't in there that long ago, so he's still a little bit spent. And our celebrities for this were Burt Reynolds, who was, of course, our guest ring announcer. Jenny Garth, who apparently was on Beverly Hills 90210, which I never watched. She was going to be the guest timekeeper for this. And, of course, we also had the special guest referee. So Burt Reynolds now gets in the ring. He's got a wrap on his hand. He has like an injured hand. And Vince McMahon said something to the effect of, I feel sorry for the muggers. And apparently Burt Reynolds was the victim of a mugging attempt here in San Diego and punched one of the guys and like injured his arm or injured his hand. That's the way the story goes anyway. So Burt is out there. And there's also a story about him cussing out Bruce Pritchard behind the scenes when Bruce was trying to explain to Burt Reynolds how to introduce the special guest referee. He wanted to let the fans find out for themselves. Let me introduce to you the special referee, and then pause, allow Piper's music to hit, and then announce him. And Burt did not appreciate the instructions from Bruce and basically told him to fuck off and he'll do it his own way. And of course, the announcement probably didn't go the way WWE wanted it to, but it was still good as Burt Reynolds announces the special guest referee, says he's a big fan of his, and he says, Roddy Piper. So this was very exciting for me as a fan. I was still bummed out that we weren't getting Hogan there, but Piper coming out was almost the next best thing because Piper was a big part of WrestleMania 1. He was a big part of putting that show together, so he is an appropriate referee. And I did like how both referees had WrestleMania matches against the challengers. And that's why it fits in nicely to where all of the participants need to agree on the referee. You can understand why Yoko and Fuji and Cornette would agree on Mr. Perfect, because they know there's heat. You would think that they would also agree with Roddy Piper for the same reason, because of the Bret Piper bloody match they had at WrestleMania 8 for the Intercontinental title. But Bret Hart and Piper had long since made up. There were no issues there, but I think Yoko and company were counting on there being issues. Burt Reynolds introduces Bret Hart as being one of the greatest wrestlers in the world today, which I thought was really awesome. And now both stars have made their entrance and we're ready for this match. And this match was really, really kind of boring. There wasn't a lot going on. Bret was, basically the underdog getting beat down and selling for this whole match. But Yoko was also kind of gassed and worn out. Bret Hart had the bad leg and he wasn't in a position to really fight from behind. He was more in a position just to survive. And I didn't really like the story they told here. I thought it would have been a great full circle moment if Bret would have been a little bit stronger in this match and they would have done a repeat of the previous year where he goes for the sharpshooter and then Fuji goes for the salt, but this time maybe Bret ducks it or he counters it or whatnot, and he's able to tap Yokozuna out in the sharpshooter. We know he can put it on him because he did it at WrestleMania 9, and I thought for sure that would be the finish they would go with. But instead, it was Bret being so injured, so broken, so beaten, and Yokozuna has got him down flat on his back. He drags him over to the corner to deliver the big bonsai drop, and that's when they do one of the weirdest finishes where Yokozuna starts losing his footing on the rope. He starts shaking. He falls backwards, lands on his back. His legs are kicking up in the air like a fucking idiot, and Bret Hart is able to just leap on him. Piper goes down immediately. 1, 2, 3, and Bret Hart is your new WWE champion. Now, it was a great finish. I was very happy about that. But at the same time, what a wonky, weird finish that was. They made it sound like the only reason Bret Hart won was because fate was on his side. If it weren't for fate, Bret Hart would have been fucked. And I just would have appreciated a little bit better of a finish than that. Like a sharpshooter submission victory is the way I would have done it. But instead, Bret Hart, by a miracle, somehow wins the title. Yokozuna seems very mad at Roddy Piper, chases Roddy Piper out of the ring as Bret Hart stands there with the pyro going off and Vince is delivering the World Wrestling Federation blasting off into the next decade, and he's really trying to hammer this shit home. Meanwhile, Lex shows up in the ring. We get a little face-off with Bret and Lex, and as a fan, I wasn't sure what to expect here. Bret extends his hand, Luger shakes it, and the two make nice. Razor comes in, baby faces come in, Pat Patterson, Gorilla Monsoon, even Vince McMahon joins in the festivities. They lift Bret Hart up on their shoulder. Savage is in there to give Bret Hart a big hug. It is so awesome. This was so well done. I loved the closing part of this. Didn't love the finish of the match, but seeing Bret Hart celebrate with the baby faces being lifted up in Madison Square Garden, you talk about a dream come true for a Bret Hart fan. That was it. And what it made, the icing on the cake was having Owen Hart show up in the aisleway, and they're inviting him in to come celebrate, but he won't do it. He just looks at Bret, staring at him, seething with jealousy, telling a great story for what their SummerSlam match and feud in the summertime would be. And Owen Hart's big push that he was about to be on the cusp of beating Bret Hart here and then going on to win the King of the Ring just a couple of months later. So this was a great way to set it up. It was a great closing of WrestleMania 10. I loved it. But if I could do it all over again, I might have found a way to involve Hogan, even though Hogan endorsing somebody else and allowing someone else to have the spotlight other than him isn't Hogan's style. I totally understand that. I'm not stupid. I just think it would have been cool to have him there. Also, changing up the finish of that Bret Hart-Yoko match to maybe have a sharpshooter victory would have been much better in my mind. But minor nitpicks there. Still, at the end of the day, for a Bret Hart fan, this is our night. This was our night. It was. Wish it could have gone a little better, but at the end of the day, still a great moment for Brett to celebrate. So I am really happy we had a chance to go back and look at this pay-per-view and review it. WrestleMania 10 was a big one that went down 30 years ago today, and a very special night if you are a fan of Bret the Hitman Hart. Well, thank you so much, guys, for sitting through this WrestleMania 10 review with me. I hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know if you have any memories of the show of your own. I would love to hear about them and read them. Please drop them in the comments below. Give this video a like if you enjoyed what you heard. And if you're still listening right now and for some reason you're not a subscriber, you might want to get on that. You guys have a great rest of your day, and we'll be catching you real soon for another podcast, video, or review. Peace.